Hello and welcome. My name is Cara O'Sullivan, and I serve the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry as Assistant Director of Continuing Education. Thanks to each of you for joining us for tonight's webinar, our second annual Daniel J. Harrington SJ Lecture. A special welcome to all of our alumni who are joining us virtually tonight. We're looking forward to our follow-up Zoom discussion following the conclusion of this webinar. As part of the school's mission, we offer an array of enrichment opportunities to foster Christian faith and promote lifelong learning. We do this by offering presentations such as this one, as well as online courses, videos, podcasts, and other resources for personal enrichment and professional development. Our Easter season online courses begin on April 14th. The courses are Call to Conscience, Eucharist, the Heart of Catholic Life, and the online book club, I'm Still Here. If you are still interested in learning more about our online courses or would like to enroll in a course, please visit our website, bc.edu/crossroads. We have included this link in the chat. Courses are filling fast. Don't miss your chance to register. Thanks to our speaker for granting us permission to record today's webinar. As soon as the recording of today's presentation is available for viewing, likely within a month, we will notify all registered participants of the availability of the recording. At the end of this presentation, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. Please feel free to enter a question into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen at any time during the presentation. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. Finally, we're able to offer live closed captioning for today's webinar. Please click on the closed captioning button on the bottom of your screen to enable this feature. Many thanks to Dot and Danny, graduate students here at the STM, for assisting us today with the closed captioning. Now I invite Megan Lovett, Director of Continuing Education, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Cara. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are, everyone. And welcome to our second annual Harrington Lecture. This lecture series honors the memory of Father Daniel J. Harrington, SJ, a celebrated scripture scholar, wonderful teacher, and a great man. I consider myself very blessed to have been one of his students. Father Harrington's commitment to service and generosity will certainly be found in tonight's presentation, The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Gregory Boyle, a Jesuit priest, is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, California, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. From 1986 to 1992, Father Boyle served as pastor of Dolores Mission Church, then the poorest Catholic parish in Los Angeles that also had the highest concentration of gang activity in the city. Father Boyle witnessed the devastating impact of gang violence on his community during the so-called Decade of Death that began in the late 1980s and peaked at 1,000 gang-related killings in 1992. In the face of law enforcement tactics and criminal justice policies of suppression and mass incarceration as the means to end gang violence, Father Boyle and parish and community members adopted what was a radical approach at the time: treat gang members as human beings. In 1988, they started what would eventually become Homeboy Industries, which employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises, as well as provides critical services to thousands of men and women who walk through its doors every year seeking a better life. Father Boyle is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion. His book, Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, was published in 2017. He has received the California Peace Prize and has been inducted into the California Hall of Fame. In 2014, President Obama named Father Boyle a champion of change. He received the University of Notre Dame's 2017 Laetare Medal, the oldest honor given to American Catholics. Currently, he serves as a committee member of California Governor Gavin Newsom's Economic and Job Recovery Task Force as a response to COVID-19. We are very honored by his presence here tonight. Welcome, Father Boyle.
Thank you, Megan. It's a privilege to be with all of you in my alma mater. I'm honored to speak tonight and with the Daniel Harrington lecture. I was taught by him twice and was privileged to be a consultor with him in our Jesuit community at Weston School of Theology. Dan was The Shape of God's Heart, He was a man who knew how to put first things recognizably first. And he lived as though the truth were true. I'm humbled by this, and no soy digno, as we say in Spanish, not worthy. So the title of this lecture is actually the name of my forthcoming book. It will appear in October 19, coming up. And the whole language, the power of extravagant tenderness, it comes from this incident with this homie named David. And David came with his mother from Uzbekistan when he was 9 years old, and he settled in Lincoln Heights, which was a very heavily Latino community that had a particular gang there that he joined. I knew him from detention facilities. He got out of prison after like 5 years. And so ICE wanted to deport him back to Uzbekistan. So I testified on his behalf, and they didn't deport him. But when I walked back from the federal building to our headquarters at Homeboy Industries, I see this homie named Louie. And I asked him if he knew David, and he said, "Oh, that's my dog right there. We call him Russian Boy." He checked this out. We were cellies at county jail, and every night he'd go out to the payphone in the hallway, and he talked to his mom in Russian. Damn, G. He spoke the whole language, which was his way of talking about fluency. So I want to talk about a spiritual fluency and tenderness as the highest form of spiritual maturity. Our notion of God is the thing that propels us. There's nothing more consequential. The mystic and theologian Meister Eckhart, who died in 1389, said that it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. And that was the notion of God he held, and it set the course of his entire life. That's how important our notions of God will be, because they will propel us to want to make God's dream come true, a community of kinship, a community of beloved belonging. And it will propel us out to the margins, because that's the only way the margins will ever get erased, is by standing out at them. And so we stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and we find a way in our own particularity to stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while, we get this extraordinary, exquisite privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And I suspect if our goal was kinship, then we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. And we brace ourselves as we stand at the margins, because people will likely accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." You go to the margins and other voices end up getting heard. But none of it makes any sense unless you've refined your notion of God. My friend Mirabai Starr, who's I recommend her, she's a mystic, and she writes about mystics. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods, which is our lifelong task in our own maturation and evolution of thinking, the holding of a notion of God that calls shots for us. a number of years ago, I buried my 92-year-old mother, and she had 8 kids. And I had buried my father some 25 years earlier. And she died the way people would want to, you know, in your own bed, surrounded by your kids, in your own home. She was sharp to the very end of her life. In fact, in the last year of her life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow. And she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. In fact, you know, weeks before she did, she said to me, and she was giddy and exhilarated. She says, "I've never done this before," which was something you might say just before skydiving. In fact, the day before she died, I was sitting alone by her bed, and which never happened because there were so many people around all the time, and she was sleeping, and she turned and she saw me, and she said, "Oh, for crying out loud," and she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed off, you know, that she hadn't died yet. Sorry. In fact, you know, the next day, I was sitting at the foot of her bed. It was exactly noon. And again, I was alone. And she lifted her head and she opened her eyes. And she let out this glorious, wondrous gasp. Skydiving. And no one in earshot of this sound could ever be afraid of death again. But in the last weeks of her life, there would be, her kids were surrounding her, and 2 or 3 or 4 or all 8 of us. And she'd be in and out of consciousness. And when she came to, she would lock onto one of us with a laser beam focused gaze. And she would say with breathless delight, "You're here, you're here." And I suspect that this is the experience of Jesus in the desert. 40 days and 40 nights, the precursor to our time of Lent. And I suspect it was mainly intimate, and Jesus connecting his longing to the longing of our God. And God saying to him simply, "You're here, you're here." And so we receive the tender glance of God, and then we choose to be in the world who God is. Tender. And so we try to embrace the architecture of the heart of Jesus and believe wholly in the whole language, the ability to be fluent, to see as mystics do, as Jesus did, to see the wholeness in each other, and then invite each other into our own dignity and our own nobility, our own wholeness as a community of kinship. At Homeboy Industries, every gang member who walks through the doors comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So they walk through the doors, barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. And so they encounter Homeboy Industries as a safe place, a place that will hold them. If it's true that a traumatized person is more likely to find their way to traumatizing others, it's equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so Homeboy becomes something of a sanctuary, and then the homies become the sanctuary that they sought, and then they go home to their kids and they present the sanctuary, and suddenly you have broken a cycle At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking gang members to measure up, since the God of love doesn't ask that of us ever. Instead, we hold the mirror up and we want to tell them the truth, that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then we watch them become that truth and inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But we have to reach in and we have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from their truth. The Buddhists say, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." At Homeboy, our hope in this therapeutic mysticism is to speak the whole language that communicates their dignity and their nobility. Oh, nobly born. In the Acts of the Apostles, they have this very odd line that says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So a number of years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, at what they call gang in-service. And so this is where social workers will get credit. They commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and you have keynotes and breakout sessions and workshops. And I've done lots of these, and so I was invited, and I figured I'd give a keynote or something, so I bought a ticket. Well, 1 week before I was to fly, I pull out the letter inviting me there, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker all damn day, 9 to 5. And I told myself what the homies often say, "Oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the only speaker at this thing." So I quickly called 2 homies into my office, Andre and Jose. Andre, African-American, Jose, Latino. The 2 of them were from enemy rival gangs. They were trainees, so they were in our 18-month training program. They were in their 9th month or so. I sit them down and I said, "Look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories in front of 600 social workers. Take your time, because we got a long ass day to fill." Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose got up first. And at that juncture, in his 9th month with us, he had sort of become a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. Now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So he was, gang member, tattooed, been to prison, but he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, "I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, 'Why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me.'" Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And then he says, "It sounds way worser in Spanish." And I've never seen this happen. The whole room got whiplash, moving from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, "I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door and she says, 'I found this kid.' And she left me there for 90 days. until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. The first t-shirt, because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. We discover in speaking the whole language, in seeing the whole person, in welcoming our wound and the wounded, that Christianity is what we do and not just adherence to a list of beliefs we hold in our head. We embrace the same architecture of the heart of Jesus, and so we seek to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. There are only 4 things. They're big, but only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. If we do those things, we have aligned our hearts with the mystical heart of Jesus, being held by the notion of God that is spacious and expansive, the God who loves us without measure and without regret. And that's the hope in our mystical seeing, that we will embrace the very things that Jesus took seriously. And so we go to the margins not to make a difference, but so that the folks at the margins make me different. Years ago, I had a homie that I met in Houston who was a gang member, been to prison, and now he was what we call in the biz a hardcore gang intervention worker. So he was working with gang members in the streets of Houston, and he pleaded with me very earnestly. He said, how do you reach them? And I found myself saying to him, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you receive who they are? Can you allow your heart to be altered? I remember 40 years ago when I was at Weston School of Theology, as we called it then, and you could take courses anywhere. So I took a course on ministry, team taught by Henry Nouwen and Parker Palmer. at Harvard Divinity. And I remember a woman asked Henry Nouwen, "What is ministry?" And he just looked at the woman and said, "Can you receive people?" And I've never forgotten that, because it feels passive, but it isn't. You go to the margins and you look at people in the eye and you say, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." And then you're welcomed into your own truth, your true self in loving. And at Homeboy, the homies will say, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so you see them and you say, "You're here, you're here." And people feel welcomed. And it's exquisitely mutual, because we're all inhabiting in the act of receiving our common nobility and dignity. We're recognizing that we were all born wanting the very same things. In the Christmas carol, "O Holy Night," it says, "Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth." And yeah, it's a song about Jesus, and yeah, it's a song about Christmas, but how is it not the job description of every one of us? You appear, and the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. And so we notice the notice of God, and we find ourselves connected to the God who comforts us, to the God who is too busy loving us to have any time left for disappointment or anything else. And so in the covenant, God says, "As I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger." And these were the people who were left out. These were the people who society at the time looked at and said, "We can live without you." And so we want to go to the margins and say, "We refuse to live without you, widow, orphan, stranger." At Homeboy Industries, we want to imagine something different. We want to be the front porch of the house that everyone longs to live in. The great John Lewis said, "We all live in the same house." He doesn't say some people live on the third floor and some live in the basement. He says it straight out. It's not aspirational for him. He doesn't say one day we may all live in the same house. He says it straight out. We all live in the same house. And so Homeboy is both solution and sign. It's concrete help for men and women who want to reimagine their lives, who have been saddled with a lethal absence of hope and have been unable to conjure up an image of what tomorrow might look like. So we want to be a solution, but we also want to announce a message. What if we were to invest in each other? What if our singular aim was to create a community of beloved belonging? What if we were to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? What if we chose together in a community of kinship to dismantle the barriers that exclude? Once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. Inclusion is God. Years ago, when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city, Dolores Mission, I would ride my bike through the projects at night. We had 8 gangs at war with each other. I buried my first young person killed because of the sadness in 1988. And I will bury my 245th and 246th next week. Tony on Tuesday, Robert on Thursday. And so I would ride my bike in the middle of the night and I would patrol and tell homies, you know, put that Uzi down. Are you sure you want to shoot that guy? And one night I was in Aliso Village and I was talking to 8 gang members in a kind of darkened archway. And I looked to the left in a poorly lit parking lot and I could see this homie named Bandit, and he was running up to a car selling crack cocaine as they did in those days. And he was walking, counting his money back to where his homies were. He didn't know I had arrived. I wish I could say he was embarrassed, but not so much. And he never stepped foot at Homeboy Industries until, of course, he did. And when I saw him walk in the door, I said, "Y ese milagro?" And he said, "I'm tired of being tired." And so he began his 18 months with us. And he excavated his wound and he came to terms with what he had been done to him, which was torturous as a child. And he came to terms with what he had done as well. And he had decided to transform his pain so he didn't have to transmit it and inflict it anymore. And he did therapy and he removed his tattoos. And he worked side by side with guys he used to shoot at. And he discovered that you cannot demonize people you know. And he gained a resilience that he had never known. And then the time came for him to leave us after 18 months. And the world was going to throw at him what it will, but this time it wouldn't topple him. And before he left, we kind of did a warm handoff and found him an entry-level job at a warehouse. Well, cut to 5 years after that, he became the floor manager of the warehouse. And then several years after that, he was promoted and elevated even further. He bought a home, got married, had 3 kids. Well, no news is good news with homies, and I hadn't heard from him in a long time until finally he calls me late on a Friday afternoon. There's panic in his voice. He says, "Gee, you gotta bless my daughter." I said, "¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" "Oh, no, on Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College." Imagine, my Jessica. But she's a little tiny chaparrita and she's only 18 years old, and Humboldt's far, it's way up north. Do you think you could give her a blessing before she leaves? And I said, "Sure. Look, tomorrow is Saturday and I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you guys come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off?" And sure enough, right at 12:30, they all show up. Abandoned and his wife and the 3 kids, including tiny little Jessica. So I put her in front of the altar and we surround her with our bodies and love. And I said, "Touch her, grab her arm, put your hand on her shoulder. Go ahead, put your hand on her head." And I tell them to close their eyes and bow their heads. And as the homies say, I do a long ass prayer. You know, I go on. And somewhere in the middle of this thing, we've all become chillones. We're all sobbing. And I have no idea why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So we kind of wipe our eyes and laugh about how mushy we got. And to change the subject, I look at Jessica and I say, hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she was very quick, forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology? And Bandit over here chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. Jessica looks at her father and does one of these, and he sees her and says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we walk out to the parking lot and big abrazos and everybody says goodbye and they pile in the car, but he hangs back and I'm glad he has. And I said, hey, te digo una cosa. I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes well up with tears, and a lone tear escapes. And he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. And so you go to the margins, not to make a difference, but to be made different. You go to the margins so you can look folks in the eye and say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. You go to the margins to inhabit your own dignity and nobility in this exquisite mutuality with the folks at the margins. You look in each other's eyes and you say, you're here, you're here. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time in standing at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you. And as they say in Congress, I yield the balance of my time to your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Father Boyle, for an amazing presentation. I don't want to waste any time. I want to get right into these questions that they've been coming in since you first started. So the first question comes from one of our audience members that is working in a high school, and she's wondering, what advice and encouragement do you have for young students, high schoolers who are embarking on their own commitment to live compassion through social justice grounded in the Gospels and Catholic social teaching?
We have 300 volunteers, pre-pandemic when we're at our fullness, but including high school students. And so they'll come and they'll cast their lot and they'll say things like, well, what are we going to do here? And I always say, no, that's the wrong question. What's going to happen to you here? So as long as they can just go to the vicinity, or as, or to be proximate, as they say, and just to enter into their life and to allow yourself to be reached and to be touched by them. And that's eternally replenishing. And that's enough, but we do get into this mode of, go to the margins and fix, save, and rescue people. But certainly that's not any advice that we would want to give. And to the credit of, all these high schools now, there's a component that is puts people in the kids in the vicinity of folks who are who carry more than the rest of us.
Thank you. Another audience member wonders, is there a common characteristic that connects all the homies, perhaps resilience or genuineness?
Well, I would invite you to look at the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACEs, they call it. Mm-hmm. And it's a scale of 1 to 10, and things that happened to somebody before they were 18, parent in prison or mentally ill or drug addict or physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. There's 10 checklists. I'm a 0 on the ACEs, which says more about white privilege than anything moral. I just, won all these lotteries, zip code lottery, parent lottery, mental health lottery. I just won all the lotteries. And they say, experts, that if you're a 4 or 5 on the ACEs, then chances are you're going to have health problems and socializing problems. Well, every man and woman who walks through our doors at Homeboy Industries is a 9 or 10 on the ACEs, which is nothing short of astounding what they have to carry, which is why you stand in awe at it rather than in judgment. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important thing, because even theologically, what do you think about sin once you know the ACEs? What do you think about evil once you know what trauma people have to endure? And not all choices are created equal. I didn't join a gang, and I grew up in the gang capital of the world, but trust me, that doesn't make me morally superior to the men and women I've been privileged to know, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than they are.
Thank you. We've had a couple questions about, your work is entirely in service with others and lifting burdens, and how do you stay compassionate and not become burnt out or tired? How are you able to keep giving?
Well, I'm kind of surly when it comes to the self-care question, because I kind of don't believe in it. I've had senior staff, and we have 800 employees and 300 trainees, and the senior people sometimes will come to me and they'll just say, I don't know, I think I need a break because I guess I'm just so compassionate. And I always say, if you're burning out, you're doing it incorrectly. It's not the way it's supposed to work. You will be depleted if you allow this to be about you. If you go to the margins to save the day, if success is important to you, if being effective is important to you, you will burn out. That's a guarantee. But if you show up every day just to stay anchored in the present moment and to delight in the people in front of you and to be reached by people and to receive them, it's eternally replenishing. You can't wait to come back the next day. I learned this the hard way a long time ago, many years ago. And, I learned that, once love is your goal and your aim, then there's no such thing as failure. And there's no such thing as success. And your true self is to be located in loving. So you don't care about return, you don't care about tally sheet or success stories. You just love being loving. Mother Teresa says we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So you try to find an approach that energizes you. How do you choose to cherish with every breath? And it's not a decision that you make once and for all, nor is it a decision that comes after your morning meditation where you decide to do that. You really do have to choose to cherish with every breath you take. So at Homeboy, it's never about surviving as the fittest, but thriving as the nurtured. And to cherish and to nurture and to love as we are loved is eternally replenishing. So people don't like that answer on the one hand because they really are quite concerned about self-care. And yeah, get sleep, and yeah, go for long walks, and yeah, talk to friends. I mean, all those things are obvious. But if you're burning out, you are doing it incorrectly. And you don't want to, because you're missing out on the joy when you do that.
Thank you. How has the pandemic impacted the work at Homeboy Industries?
Well, the mayor has decided that we are an essential organization, so I'm not arguing with them. So, most of us are all fully vaccinated. We were probably shut down for the first 3 months of the pandemic because we, like everybody, didn't quite know what to make of it. But we quickly shifted to everything on Zoom and FaceTime, therapy, classes, anger management. People continued to graduate, with high school diplomas in our school. And then early on, from day one, we were able to pivot our eateries and our bakery to address food insecurity in the county. So under contract with LA County and the city, we made, I think, 300,000 meals for shut-ins and seniors and homeless. And it's a program we called Feed Hope. And so that continues. And then the homies, we sent them out 2 by 2 in their vehicles to deliver these meals. And it was it was kind of a magical thing, we even had Prince Harry and Meghan Markle come. I don't know how that happened, but they called one day and they said, I had a conversation with her, and then she called me, some days later, and she said, hey, we want to come in, no press or anything, and we want to prepare meals with the homies. And so they did. The homies had no idea who Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were, but they were the real deal. That was really quite wonderful to watch. And having said all that, the epicenter of COVID in the state of California was Boyle Heights, where I live. And, I will have buried 14 homies and homegirls killed during this year of pandemic, which is not surprising in a sense, because gang violence is about a lethal absence of hope, and you throw into the mix a once every 100-year event, pandemic, and that is going to exacerbate and mess with people's hope, people who are already quite tenuous and hanging on, and it really keeps them from imagining tomorrow. So last week, 2 weeks ago, I had 6 funerals. Half of them were COVID, and half of them were gang homicides. And because the folks in this community in Boyle Heights are frontline people, and so consequently, they were disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. But we're kind of back, masks, distance. A homegirl checks your temperature as you walk in the door. And so we're kind of in a vibrant place, and we've kind of recaptured the spirit of tenderness and cherishing that is kind of the hallmark of the culture.
Thank you for sharing. How might our audience members, both near and far to where you are located, participate in the mission of Homeboy Industries?
Well, you're always needing money. Unfortunately, we're a $25 million annual operation, and people always ask me, have I ever been afraid? And I always say only about meeting payroll every 2 weeks, which is tomorrow. So that's always a struggle when you have, and all roads lead to us. We have 120,000 gang members in LA County, and they all know where we are and what we do. And we don't exist for those who need help, but only for those who want it. So they have to walk in the door. Once they do, it's ticker tape parade and red carpet, but that costs money. So it's always been a white knuckle ride for as long as for 33 years since we've existed. But you also want to change how we see things, and how we name things, and how do we address mass incarceration. Mother Teresa said the problem in the world is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. Well, until we can stand against that idea, we won't make very much progress, in confronting mass incarceration. And the largest mental institution on the planet Earth is LA County Jail. And that's because for our entire history as a country, we've always punished wound instead of heal. And so my hope is that, we'll continue to move that dial where it's about care first and jails last. And so Homeboy announces that message. What if we were to invest in people rather than endlessly incarcerate our way out of our problems? So everybody, wherever you are, can chip away at these issues.
Thank you. One of our audience members connected to your response asked about, what could this look like in their own pastoral ministry and parishes and spiritual direction and chaplaincy to go to the margins?
Well, you have to find, I always call it your own particularity, because my margins aren't your margins. And so you have to find anybody who's left out. And every community has people who have been denied access. This isn't about assimilating people who are at the margins. This is about, you're not inviting them to the center, you're going to the margins. And, the poet Wallace Stevens says, we live in the description of the place and not the place itself. And we've settled for the description of the place, and we need to hold out for the place itself, which is exquisite mutuality, where there is no us and them, where you obliterate the illusion that we are separate. And so you find a way in your own town, in your own city, in your own community. If you can't find it in your own community, you go outside of it, where you find people who carry more than the rest, because we really do want to live in the place itself of kinship and connection. I was reading George Saunders, the writer, the other day, and he was saying that kindness is the only non-delusional response to everything. So your kindness, it will be the way to kind of guide you to where you need to be and how you need to stand. And implied, of course, in his statement is that every other response is delusional. Anger, self-righteousness, arrogance, save the day, put on the cape, rescue people. Everything else is delusional. The only thing that isn't is kindness. And I think that's important. In the meditation on the two standards of Ignatian spiritual exercises, Ignatius just says simply, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. So it's not Jesus beckoning us or wagging his finger at us or get your ass over here. What's your problem? No, see him standing there. And so what it does is it invites at a very visceral level where we go, yeah, I want the same architecture of heart as Jesus. I want to stand where Jesus stands. I want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. I want to stand in the same place, but not because Christianity is some grim duty. It isn't. If you're doing it correctly, it isn't. My joy, yours, your joy complete is what Jesus says. It is where the joy is, which is the best kept secret. That if you go stand in the lowly place, which is to say the margins, it's where the joy is. And to that end, that you may be one, we create a community where nobody is outside and everybody is welcome.
Amen. I think we will close there. That was beautiful. And I echo many of the comments in the Q&A, just thanking you for your presentation today. It is my pleasure to bestow on Father Boyle STM's second annual Alumni Distinguished Service Award. And this award is given to Father Boyle in recognition of his boundless compassion, radical kinship, and extravagant tenderness, in recognition of his prophetic witness to the gospel message of recognizing Christ in our brothers and sisters in all circumstances, in recognition of his life's ministry of faith and action, in recognition of his work to make a difference in marginalized communities, and in recognition of his being a compassionate face of the Catholic Church for so many. So Father Boyle, it's my honor on behalf of Dean Stegman and the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry to award you this Alumni Distinguished Service Award. So thank you for all that you do for your community.
Should I bow so that you can place it over my head?
Place it over via Zoom.
Thank you very much. Honored.
You are most welcome. Thank you for all that you do. And thank you to our audience members for joining us this evening or this afternoon. We do have another webinar coming up on April 8th. Father Peter Jives of the Society of Jesus is going to be presenting the Spiritual Exercises, a reflection on human suffering from the underside of history. Father Jives is the founder and director of A Faith That Does Justice. And so it's a great organization based here in Boston, so that we're hoping that you're able to join us for that as well. Our alums, our STM alums, if you're going to be joining us for our alumni event afterwards, feel free to take a quick break and then join us on the other Zoom link that you received. Again, thank you so much, Father Boyle, for your time with us today and for sharing your stories and your experience. What a wonderful experience it was for everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.